All right. Let's see. All right. So welcome everyone to another Celo All Core Dev call. Really excited about the call today. We have a lot of interesting topics to cover. Um, yeah, let's get started. So the first proposal is CIP 35. This would be like a candidate to add to Donut Hardfork. James, do you want to kick it off and
Uh,
or
Sorry,
go ahead.
I lost my meeting window there for a second. Um, yeah, this is a really late in the game candidate for inclusion with Donut. This is a departure from our normal process and is kind of being considered out of the normal flow of things. Uh, The reason for that is we feel that the benefits to usability and to developer experience are extremely compelling. I'm going to let Or talk a bit about the technical aspects of this in a minute, but I want to talk about the like why we're considering this. Uh, the the background is that when Celo was in the design phase, we decided to add a few extra fields to the transaction object to enable new protocol features. We added a fee currency, so you could choose to pay fees in something other than the native asset. We added and we added a system for a gateway fee, which would be a way to tip a full node that assisted a light client in creating a transaction. And so the transaction specifies in what currency it pays the fee and this additional tip to the gateway. The unfortunate consequence of that is that Celo transactions are not compatible with Ethereum tooling. Despite being an EVM chain and having all of the same calling semantics and features as Ethereum, you cannot use, for example, MetaMask or Wallet Connect or any of these other Ethereum tools to create Celo transactions. And that means that we've kind of walled ourselves off from this very large ecosystem of Ethereum users and developers. Um, the goal of CIP 35 is to resolve that. Um, and rather than trying to remove these Celo-specific features, we preferred to enable Ethereum compatible transactions. So if CIP 35 is activated, the Celo network will accept Celo transactions and the older Ethereum style transactions. And this means that Celo would work natively with MetaMask and all other Ethereum tooling, essentially.
Um, or you want to dive into the technical as well?
Sure. Uh, so yeah, that's a good place on the page. So as it says there in the specifications, we're just going to, instead of allowing normal Celo transactions as we do now, we're going to add a new transaction type that we would also support, which is Ethereum compatible transactions. And essentially there are two formats which are used both in Ethereum and in Celo. One of them is RLP, which is what's used for the peers communicating with each other, and it's used for the actual transactions that are in the blocks. And RLP serialization, essentially transactions are serialized as lists. And in Ethereum, those lists have 9 items. In Celo, they have 12 items. So the proposal is to also accept transactions which are in Ethereum format, which have 9 items. And there's no need to have in the transaction any kind of indicator of which type it is, because you can tell which type it is just by the number of fields. So the clients are just able to know, okay, this is a normal Celo transaction, this is an Ethereum compatible one. And semantically, what that means, you see there at the bottom of that screen, if you get an Ethereum transaction, Ethereum compatible transaction, you'll just treat it as if the fee currency is null, meaning you're going to pay the fee in Celo, and the gateway fee is 0, and the gateway fee recipient is nil, which most transactions have anyway. Can you scroll up a little bit to the previous section? Yeah, that one. This also has an implication for signature verification, because when you sign a transaction, you sign a hash of the data in the transaction. And for Ethereum, it has certain fields. For Celo, it has additional fields. So the client needs to know how to sign the transaction. So it just calculates a different hash if it's a Celo transaction or an Ethereum compatible transaction. And the same goes for verifying a signature. And there's an implementation of this on a branch that's mentioned below. Now, if you scroll down further, yeah, that's JSON section. So this is a change just to add. So the other format that we use and Ethereum uses is JSON, which is what the RPC uses. So the various Ethereum node, they can take in transactions in JSON, they output transactions in JSON, and that's really what the ecosystem mostly uses. And so this AIP proposes adding a new field that's Boolean to the JSON representation to say whether this transaction is a Ethereum compatible one or not. The reason is, unlike RLP, where you explicitly see this has 9 elements or this has 7 elements, in JSON, if you want to do it implicitly, there are a few ways. One way is if the fields are absent, then you say it's Ethereum compatible. But especially in JavaScript, there's not always a hard distinction between absent field or just fields with like undefined or null. And in practice, it's very common to have several transactions where the fee currency is nil, the gateway fee recipient is nil, and the gateway fee is 0. Another way that's possible to do it without this new field would be if the transaction is signed, you just try to verify the signature both ways. Because like I mentioned earlier, the hash used for the signature is different depending on the type. So you could first try to verify the signature as an Ethereum compatible one. If it doesn't work, verify as a Celo or vice versa, doesn't matter. But when writing this CIP, I kind of always prefer to be more explicit, have the transaction say exactly what kind it is. But part of the specification is if you get a transaction and this field is absent, then just treat it as if it was false. So this field is not really going to be required if you make RPC calls or anything like that. And if you are receiving RPC JSON, you can ignore it if you don't need it. The only cases where you really need to rely on this field is if you want to verify the signature yourself, for example. That's the proposal. There's a link further on to a branch on the Celo blockchain repo that implements this. And there's an issue on the CIP's Celo proposals repo for discussion. A couple of other things to mention, just if you scroll down. Yeah, so backwards compatibility, this is not going to be a big problem. Of course, it has to be done as a hard fork because we're introducing a new transaction format. But any tool that generates normal Celo transactions will keep working as is because the support for them is not changing in any way. We're just adding support for a different format. Software which parses RLP will have to be updated, but there's not very much software that does that. It's mostly done by the blockchain client itself. Yeah. And one thing to mention just at the bottom where it says other considerations is this is kind of has a soft implication that if Ethereum introduces new transaction formats in the future, like EIP 2718, then there's kind of a presumption that if the standard makes sense, then we'll also want to implement it. And we'll also want to do it in a timely fashion. So we don't necessarily have to time our hard forks to match Ethereum's hard forks. But a few months or something like that, when we do our next regularly scheduled hard fork, then we should also support it if it makes sense. And the reason is, well, if we're adding support for Ethereum tooling like MetaMask or other wallets, if they implement a new standard and they start signing transactions like that, then we want that to also work for people who are using it to transact on Celo.
Just in the interest of time, I want to start taking it to community feedback. So like with this proposal, it would allow for 2 different RLP transaction specs. And the question we want to do is, can we get it past the draft stage to last call? And last call, the way last call works, it's like essentially a review period. And basically within that review period, everyone can review the spec before we can accept the standard, like the specification, and move it as something that we want to add to the hard fork, the upcoming hard fork. So is there any questions, immediate question anyone has about this? No questions. So basically, again, this will make improve Ethereum compatibility. It would allow us to use MetaMask and stuff while still maintaining the existing normal Celo transaction that is RFP encoded. So if there's no more question, I would like to start getting rough consensus on moving this from draft to last call.
I have one question I think it's worth mentioning at this point. It's like, if we accept this at this stage, how long will the hard fork be delayed versus if we reject it right now?
I think there might be a question for Mariana.
So to some sense, the hard fork has already been delayed as we were considering this. How much further delay, I can't give an exact number, but it shouldn't be much because the implementation is already there. We need to write some like end-to-end testing. But other than that, we would just go back to the normal process for the hard fork of, pre-release testing for it.
I get it. So.
Hey, now you have a question?
Yeah, I maybe had less of a question, but more, I think, of a comment in the sense that I think, of course, compatibility with a wide spread of tooling out there on Ethereum, I think is in itself very valuable. One thing that I would maybe call as a concern is that there will be, I assume there will be a set of dApps that will likely just port over Ethereum dApps over like without adjustment to Celo, which effectively means that those dApps will not allow folks with just stable token balance to participate in those dApps. And again, it's of course very hard to predict how exactly that will play out, but it might end up with a two-class level of dApps where like some dApps just like exclude what I consider like a large part of the target audience of Celo itself. And so I don't think that's like an opposition to the CIP, because I think in of itself the benefits probably outweigh that concern, but just wanted to flag that.
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting concern because we would like to give all possible benefits of Celo to people who are only transacting in stable tokens. My kind of initial response, though, is that we already de facto have that situation. The people with stable tokens have no dApps to interact with right now. And I think adding Ethereum compatibility and getting more dApps into the system and getting more things that they could use will naturally help resolve that problem and will help kind of provide more opportunities for these people to interact with the system that don't currently exist.
One point to add is that we can kind of think of this as almost like not the CIP, but as using Ethereum tooling as a stepping stone. So let's say that I'm coming from Ethereum. I'm reluctant at first. I don't want to install a fork of MetaMask or a totally new wallet. I can use this to start out. And if later I decide I want to make use of additional functionality, I can install a fork like Nifty Wallet or the other fork that's being developed. So in a sense, like the users will still be able to use, so long as the dApps just support them as well.
Zviad, you had a question?
Yeah, I think I had a sort of a comment in similar vein as Nam. I think compatibility is nice, but there is potential danger in the fact that, for example, if MetaMask just works without having to change anything, that can be actually detrimental, because now people just build for that MetaMask and there will never be a fork of a MetaMask. There won't really be enough incentives to actually change it. And MetaMask will continue to optimize for Ethereum experience, which is different from Celo in many ways, including things like transaction times, right? So if you're building a UI where transactions take 5 seconds and they take 5 seconds, you build it differently, you tailor it for that, you provide a better experience. The other stuff continues to build for Ethereum, and you just continue to stay in this hole where you're not able to move away from basically being Ethereum version, and you have a harder time actually taking advantage of new features. That would be my worry, because if compatibility is nice, but it can actually delay things. Like there would be no reason to fork fork MetaMask and to make improvements for Celo inside MetaMask, for example, which I think can be a problem. It's unclear if it will be, but it can be a problem.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the feedback and the comment. I just want to, just because in the interest of time, and we have a lot more other proposals, and this is an hour call, I want to remind everyone that this is a technical specification for inclusion, and any of the reasons, well, are super valid. All these concerns about compatibility with Ethereum, what it would mean for dApps. At a high level, what we're concerned with is whether this, as a technical specification, is sound enough for at least to be reviewed in a review period, right? So what I want to do is, at the very least, move it to that review period where you can provide all that feedback and stuff and issues. And if we find that the issues are like compelling enough to move it away from from accepted back to the draft state, we can totally do that. But I just wanted to point that out as well in the interest of time. So I would suggest just let us try, just get a feel for the room for rough consensus, just to move it to the review period, and we can put the review period 1 to 2 weeks and stuff. We can agree on that, and just comment. We have the issue comments here where you can provide all that feedback and stuff, and and then we can take it from there. How does that sound for everyone? Cool. So I just want to get a feel for the room. Do we have a rough consensus on moving this to the review period, which is what we call last call? And if you can either say yes, or if by not saying anything, I'm assuming we can and stuff. But just if you don't want to move it to the review period, please speak up. Cool.
I have one procedural question I see. I'd like to talk more about whether or not we should include the ETH compatible field or not, which is a relatively small thing. I don't think it should block implementation by any means. But I'm just wondering if we can, continue to have the discussion after it's in the review period already.
Yeah, discussion within the GitHub issues where we can continue that and stuff, because we try to capture all the discussion points within the issue ticket, just to keep it, be able to reference it and stuff. Any other comments? We just want to move it to last call. Okay, so I'm gonna put because there's a lot of points and stuff. Normally, if there was no feedback or everyone was okay, I'll just put it for 1 week kind of review period. But because of the feedback, I'm gonna give a week and a half, so 10 days review period. Today is the 25th. I'll do the math, right? But we'll do a 10-day review period for this. So this is gonna move to last call. When it's in last call, doesn't mean it's final or anything. It means you have the opportunity to give all the feedback you want, and it should be taken into the consideration by the core dev team. And then if there's anything that is glaringly obvious that we shouldn't proceed with this, then obviously we can take it back to the draft stage and we think through it and stuff. But yeah, so we'll move it to the last call for now, and then we can continue the discussion on the GitHub ticket. And think the donut overall hard fork, if it goes to accepted, it will be included within donut, a new meta specification that I will write down that will capture CIP35 inclusion if it gets included. So yeah, next up we have CIP36. So that's mutual credit. Duke, you want to kick it off?
Sure thing. Okay, so mutual credit is a system. It has some incredibly interesting properties. So accounts can be positive or negative. Each account has a credit line or balance associated with it. The credit line is drawn from the overall goodwill of the network. So this implementation creates an ERC20 token that, when spent past the where it's would be 0, it goes into the negative, and that's the minting process. So if you have a negative balance and then you receive tokens, it will pay that back until it goes to 0, and then it will go into the positive. Any positive balance acts exactly like an ERC20 token.
Yeah, so just to give everyone like another like background on this specification. So this is what we consider a ring 3 category, which is kind of similar to what the ERC20 category of specification would be classified under, which means it has no impact on the core protocol from like a consensus point of view or with the core contracts. It's more like a best practices kind of standard for that would, you know, encourage adoption by other people building on Celo. If they want to build mutual credits, what would be the standard they can take a look at and stuff. And this would be an example of that you know, Duke and his team provided and stuff.
Yeah, we want anyone to be able to create mutual credit systems and be able to leverage the trust and goodwill of the entire network as a whole, rather than relying on parties that have a high level of liquidity to, you know, basically kind of recreate the current financial system in a decentralized way. It's actually like a kind of fundamentally different source of knowledge. So in the motivation, as you're saying, yes, the ERC20 spec altered the landscape of cryptocurrency and making token creation accessible to anyone. So this seeks to be the ERC20 of mutual credit, so that anyone can spin this up in their community or for a particular purpose.
Yeah, and if accepted, it would just be like a CRC, like we would classify as CRC 36, which stands for Celo request for comment, which is similar to ERC, which is Ethereum request for comments. So as a CIP 36, it will be like the nickname will be CRC 36. One question I did have, like me specifically, is have we ever considered auditing some of this smart contract? We do have a community fund, and it potentially might be an interesting thing for them as well.
That's a nice idea. Our blockchain architect put it together using the Open Zeppelin contracts, obviously, but an audit is definitely in our near future, and I think it would be great to publish that officially. Do you think that it would be worthwhile to do that before we move forward with the CIP?
So because this is a ring 3, like so it's not as like, you know, there's not a lot of roadblocks and review period and implementation compared to ring 1 and 2, which is like core stuff. But there would be a review period, and what happens after the review period, what we would want, we would just move it to accepted, because this is something that anyone can build on the protocol and deploy that kind of smart contract. But yeah, I think it would be like, definitely something important to have at the very least, to see if you know, if we are recommending this as a standard for other people to use, that there's some sort of assurance of safety, just from like a auditing perspective. We have a bunch of hands raised. I'll start off with Victor. Victor, you have a question?
Yeah, for sure. So my first reaction when I see this proposal is like, I'm really excited about the idea of like creating a standardized interface for mutual credit. I currently don't see that in this proposal though. So like, I see your implementation, which is great, but what I think this really needs to be is more like what ERC20 is. Like if you actually, you know, look at the spec, where it specifies, you know, the functions that define the ERC20 interface, what their defined ranges are, what their defined behaviors are, and basically providing, you know, the you know, must, shoulds, mays, the actual like tight specification that you need to reference these things. And so I think if you were,
yeah, so basically we would essentially, should I reference the ERC20 because it is the same except for the credit line issuance, or should I kind of copy that because it has the same methods with the same signatures?
I would say it'd be great to say, you know, like this extends ERC20. So that implies that everything ERC20 does, like a CRC 36 token must be an ERC20 token, but it must also have these extra features. And it must define these extra functions or extra fields or behaviors in general. So just like be very specific about what it actually means to be a CRC 36 token.
That's a good point. Yeah, this is it was more of a high level description, but I see that there's like a specificity there.
Yeah. And the whole reason for that is that basically you want it to be a predictable interface that like people can build dApps against and actually have it where, you know, my dApp now supports every CRC 636 token all at once without having extra work. And you need really tight specifications for that to actually, you know, pan out.
Yep. Yep. Makes perfect sense.
Ziad, you had a question?
Yeah, so I sort of made a comment around this, and to, you know, disclosure, I'm not that familiar with general ERC like Ethereum RFC setup too, but I'm a bit confused into why take it as a standard before testing it out in public. As in, why not just first try it out, learn a little bit, right? None of this exists, right? Right now, there are no dApps that use something like this. This is not deployed anywhere. We haven't tried this, right?
It is deployed. We have something that's not public that is almost using this, but yes, it hasn't been tried out on a large scale.
Yeah, or not even large scale, just, you know, smaller scale where you use it in a few projects just to get more feedback, right? Because it's kind of hard to review that interface is good without seeing real use cases, right? Because we can accept it into standard and then find out that it's missing something and then be like, then change the standard, which seems a weird process to go through rather than to actually have it, because there aren't like competing alternatives right now, right? This is the only suggested idea for mutual credit. So for anyone interested into doing anything with mutual credit, they will come to this anyways, right? To have it actually play out a little bit and then come back and then to standardize it, at least that makes more sense to me as a process to standardize things rather than to define an interface without actually having use cases that are running right now, or at least having, you know, some other team using your interface. It just seems like you know, at least to me it seems backwards, because I would rather see it other way around. I'm not sure how the process goes for other things too, because at least for ERC22, it wasn't like first ERC20 came in and then you know, people started making tokens. People were making tokens. A bunch of lessons came out from there. Then you come up with an actual standardized thing that sort of takes the best parts out of it, right? So I feel like that approach sort of makes more sense to me, but it's not a huge differentiator.
The other thing I want to add is just by somebody submitting a standard for what they consider a mutual credit, it doesn't mean that this is the standard, like from like a large network of things. So for example, there's multiple NFT standards, there's multiple token standards. ERC20 is the most popular one of them and stuff like that. But I just wanted to point it out there. In the interest of time, I'll just take another question, Asa.
I'm not sure if this is like a question on the standard itself or a question on like the usage of the standard, but I guess one challenge that I think I guess I'm curious. It seems that like mutual credit systems need to come are not possible without a form of Sybil resistance, because otherwise, like when you don't have Sybil resistance, it's like super easy to just abandon your debt and not be held accountable to that. And so I'm curious, you know, perhaps this is not the right forum to discuss this, but I'm curious if like you have pointers as to where I can learn more about how that problem is being addressed.
Credit line assignation is the most difficult problem in mutual credit, and it makes or breaks, historically speaking, how wide the net is cast. I'll just speak for another like 20 seconds. I think it completely will break the system if ever you try to like give everyone credit. But yeah, so the way we're approaching it is a protocol plus business. So the business is doing actual KYC, onboarding businesses only that have, you know, that demonstrate, and, you know, it's sort of a centralized credit risk assessment to begin with, but then slowly creating a DAO so that another smart contract will plug into the credit line assigning method. So you know, that hopefully will be another proposal that as a, you know, credit line assigner or, you know, credit risk assessor, that's more of a DAO.
All right.
Very cool. Look forward to learning more.
Yeah, same here. So I think like the feedback that I'm seeing over this proposal is like, you know, Victor's feedback about at least making it similar to the EIP20, at least from like the all the methods pointed out and stuff, or and like referencing it more. Is Viad had about something about you know, whether it's been deployed in the wild before and stuff like that. So what I think would be interesting is maybe having more of that kind of data. Doesn't matter what format, but I'm kind of interested, me personally, in how, you know, mutual credit like already deployed, you know, by your team and stuff. I think also, yeah, I mean, like, I think, you know, with that kind of feedback, you know, we can have a more updated kind of draft and stuff, and then we can take it again within the call. At the same time, because this is, doesn't really impact core and stuff, like moving it to like a final kind of status is kind of straightforward, but, you know, given all that feedback that can be implemented and stuff. But like, yeah, I'm looking forward to you know, seeing more of this, because I think it's super important and exciting, and I'm, you know, grateful that you submitted this proposal. So yeah, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, CIP 34, which is implement flash swap support in Exchange. I think that's Via. Do you want to pick it up?
Yeah, sure. So just to give a quick overview of what this is. So the second iteration of Uniswap protocol has introduced, basically changed the way the swap is implemented, where when you make a swap call on an exchange, instead of first taking your tokens and then returning you the receiving tokens, it actually optimistically first sends you the receiving tokens, then calls a function of your choice, and only after that transfers in the input tokens inside the contract. And what this has unlocked in general is an ability to do basically zero capital arbitrage, or sometimes flash loans too, but ignoring the flash loan part, just zero capital arbitrage part is the important part, where, for example, you can, you know, get the receiving token first, go to some other system, trade it there, get the input tokens afterwards, and then bring it back to the exchange. And this is pretty important to implement inside the core exchange, because without this, it will be very difficult for the Mento exchange to be the arbitrage hub, for it to be the on-chain arbitrage hub. Because if another exchange does this, let's say if the Uniswap deployment is the only one that has it because it's the Uniswap fork, all of the on-chain arbitrage will actually use the Uniswap one more than the Mento version. And this is that's not necessarily great, because you want the Mento exchange to be used in as much on-chain arbitrage as possible, because that just accumulates fees for reserve. That's mostly just noise trading, which is just good, just general net positive. So I've been a little bit scarce on the actual implementation details, because I just wanted to get a general sense of this, and I'm also not super familiar with how you want to move forward with these proposals, since I'm also not part of C Labs. And I also posted some implementation comments in this discussion thing itself. I think that sums it up, and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I believe we have a few folks from our protocol economics team at C Lab who are interested in giving feedback. Is Nadeem on the call, or?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Hey, oh, yeah.
Yes, hi. Yeah, I mean, actually, I have a few questions. I mean, I just started to look into this 1 day ago, but I have some questions. I mean, and it's mainly about questions regarding the stability and maybe security. You are writing there are no special security considerations, but I would like to have the focus a little bit on the stability mechanism, because for me this is the most valuable thing around Mento, and it's the main focus. And when you say that any arbitrage is good, I would be a little bit more specific about this. I mean, for me, arbitrage is good if it happens to bring the peg back. So at the moment we are in a state where we have arbitrage that happens undeliberately because of a delay. So I'm not so much in favor of this arbitrage. So arbitrage benefits for me are good if they happen to bolster the stability related arbitrage opportunities. So this is one thing. And then I just would like to see a little bit of an analysis what this could mean to the stability mechanism. I mean, one thing is about this having these two kind of arbitrages, and the other, and I haven't thought about this too deeply, but how could these flash swaps affect the whole stability mechanism in terms of, I don't know, could it be that someone could stall Mento by just like taking a big flash loan just for one update cycle and not allowing any other trades? I don't know how it works exactly. Then is it possible to influence the price by just taking a loan and just giving him it back by accepting the costs to take the loan, not doing anything with it, but would this affect the price? And then do we need to consider any further implementation? I mean, it's part of Uniswap, but do they have any further security, or do they have any further implementation that secures having the flash swap in their system? Do we need to port other things to Mento? Sorry for the list of questions. I can repeat it there.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think the part here is that from security perspective, it doesn't change anything, because anything that's possible to do with the flash swap is already possible to do as long as you bring in the capital. And the amount of capital is not actually that large considering the bucket sizes in Mento in the first place. And from implementation perspective, all the other parts that you mentioned, like the blocking and so on, those are not really possible, because they would be possible without the flash swap thing either. Since it's all is finished in one transaction, it doesn't really affect transactions before or after, right? Because the exchange will be done, and that's it. The transactions never interleave with each other, right? So that doesn't happen. What it could affect is if somebody writes another DApp that takes price from Mento directly. Now you could potentially affect that app, but you could affect that app without flash swap support either. And generally, that's sort of a pretty bad way to write, your price getting things, because you want to either get it from the oracles or from something different. You never want to get the immediate price from the buckets, because that will pretty much always lead to some painful experiences down the line. And I think my main point here is that everything that's possible with flash swap is already possible with capital. It just unlocks to do this without capital, which actually makes things more efficient, because things will be done faster instead of, for example, prices getting out of whack on two different systems. Let's say you've got Mula and its own liquidations, and you've got Mento with its own exchange rate. Those things getting out of sync is not good, because when somebody with larger capital comes in and tries to sync them up, and if they're farther apart, that will only cause larger damage. Having something like this actually allows to run arbitrage more safely and more quickly, which actually just makes sure that the prices just remain stable throughout in across all of the on-chain protocols. As for the security, there are some extra considerations, mostly around reentrancy. I think this one is already implemented. Those safeguards are already implemented in Celo, but that's something that, I'm not 100% confident, but, I think those are already covered. But it does introduce extra security, but it's more of a, programming security kind of thing, not an economic related one, more of just, solidity related security, to make sure reentrancy things become more possible if it's not protected properly.
And you said that the bucket sizes are not large enough at the moment to have any severe risk. But I mean, like, my expectation is that these bucket sizes, they would have to get larger in the future. I mean, at the moment we can live with them, but if everything is growing and we will have some more CUSD demand, I'm expecting that we need to ramp up the sizes. But you still think that there's no problem with larger sizes and flash?
Yeah, I mean, it's because if this creates a risk, that risk already exists anyways, right? And also the important part is that other protocols like Uniswap and even Mula and so on, they will support flash loans anyways. And what will happen instead is somebody will take out a flash loan from Mula and do the same thing, and then just have to pay extra fees, which actually just makes things less efficient and just will increase fees on-chain overall, just across all the protocols.
Asa, you had a question?
Yeah, maybe not so much a question as just like wanted to underscore certain things that people have said. Yeah, so Zviad, I think your reasoning around like this only makes things that were already possible, like lowers the barrier to things that were already possible, I think is a compelling one, and I would agree with that. I think there is a question that Or touched on in the chat, which is basically, and that Nadim touched on when he was talking, which is basically to what degree is like increasing the volume of arbitrage trades going through Mento a desirable property for the protocol. We basically are seeing like two types of trades, or like kind of two types of trades kind of seem possible via Mento right now. The first is arbitrage that kind of helps kind of stabilize the Celo dollar by kind of, you know, in the way that Mento is designed to work. And the other is arbitrage that like is not related to the stability of the Celo dollar. And I think we're seeing, I guess it's a good thing that we're seeing more of the latter than the former, because it means that the peg is being held. But I think there is an argument that Mento only exists to provide arbitrage for the former. And so I guess what would be compelling to me about this proposal is maybe less about kind of increasing volumes to kind of send more kind of, again, if these are all just like wash trades, you know, increasing volumes means more funds to the reserve. I think that's great. What would be, I think, more compelling, a more interesting line of thought and research to me is like how this sort of thing would like lower the friction around performing arbitrage trades of the former type. So looking at the trades that actually bring the Celo dollar back into its peg, like would this feature make Mento more efficient at doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will participate in that too, assuming we get USDC or potentially USDT ever deployed on Celo, because those will be deployed with another AMM, you know, potentially a curve clone or even inside Uniswap, and you want to be able to trade against those. I think the primary part that I want to underscore is that if this is not implemented inside Mento, essentially what's going to happen is that those exchanges, but that arbitrage will still happen, but it will happen through something like, let's say, Uniswap, right? Which, you know, as long as one of them is reasonably successful, it's going to have enough liquidity to match the Celo bucket sizes. That is, you know, there is no world where a successful project will not match Celo bucket sizes, which are, even if you increase it, it's never going to get as huge, right? You'd probably never want that to get as huge in the 5-minute time period. And then what that means is that those other protocols will take the fees, right? The same arbitrage will happen anyways, except now you actually don't get the extra fees that you would have gotten if you actually made Mento be the core protocol. That's the difference, and that's sort of the reason why I wrote this and why I think it's important to implement this early rather than wait it out, because once the arbitrageurs set up their things, then it won't change. And then you will essentially still get the arbitrage part of it, the loss part, when the price moves and you have a wrong price, but you won't actually get the fees which move the price back as much. And I think that's the difference. Like, we can go through some scenarios and we can potentially write them up too. Like, you know, for example, you need to liquidate something in Mula. Instead of that getting liquidated against Mento, it will get liquidated against Uniswap, which then will trade against Mento anyways, right? Because the price will get out of whack a little bit in there, and then it will trade against Mento. But both of those fees will go to Uniswap instead of both of those trades actually happening inside Mento and both of those fees going to Mento itself. That's sort of the difference. Yeah.
Sorry, I need to interject.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, we have another major topic. I think, Zviad, you have a lot of valuable feedback today.
Yep.
And I'm hoping everyone can capture it within the issue ticket. This is recorded anyway, so if anyone wants to review all the feedback later, I'm going to post the video later. I'm sorry, Victor, I just need to move on. We have like 11 minutes left. Let's go to CIP 32. So Cody, you want to kick it off?
Awesome, thank you. Is this the last topic, just in the interest of time?
Yes, it's the last topic.
Okay. I will actually share my screen. I cannot share my screen. Host disabled attendees screen sharing.
I think I'll need to make you a co-host. Let me do that in a second.
Okay.
Stop share, and then I'll make you make co-host. Can you try now?
All right, it works. Cool. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is a revisit of CIP 32, which is around the attestation node incentives. It's titled 32.1 because it is a pretty far pivot from the original design, and that is in a large part thanks to a lot of the feedback from the community. And so jumping into it, the first thing I wanted to call out is that when we're thinking about attestation node incentives, it helps to look at where we are today. And this is a shout out to all of the attestation node operators, all the validators that are on the network, because over the last couple months, we've been able to significantly reduce the failure rate. And as of this past week, all of the attestation services are performing above a 70% completion rate, which is amazing. So props to everyone. So the gist of the idea for the new attestation service design, attestation service incentives design, is to basically split the existing epoch rewards into two parts. Just for an example, I showed it as 80-20, but it could be divided into any different partition. This 80% validator incentives is like calculated exactly the way that it is today, except that today it's 100%. This would be now just calculated on top of the 80% or whatever percentage that we decide. And then the interesting part is this 20%. And so we would be taking 20% of the existing reward and allocating it to incentivize the attestation service operation. And so rather than just saying, you know, if you do get 100% completion rate, then you get 100% rewards. Realistically, there's a lot of factors that are outside of the control of an attestation service. So things like the SMS provider or Valora, or you know, like there's other factors, or even like the user behavior. There's going to be naturally some abandonment. So the idea is that we can set some kind of target completion rate. In this case, the example showing 70%, and anything that is above, any node that's able to achieve above a 70% completion rate over this epoch would automatically just get 100%. And then below that 70% would be a linear amount of the reward. So, yeah, so this factor is governable and can change over time. So 70% was chosen because all of our current attestation services are performing above this, and so everyone would just get 100% as they are today. And then let's say that we found that there's some way to improve the attestation service performance, the completion rate, by making a change in Valora or working with different providers. That then we might want to bump this up because naturally this number will increase. And the asterisk here is basically saying that if this is looking at it on a per validator basis, but let's say that there's a systemic outage and everyone's values just drop down to 0 or near 0. Well, we would have a minimum threshold in which if the success rate, the average success rate of everyone dropped below this rate, then it would be considered a systemic outage, and there would be like we shouldn't be penalizing attestation services for something that's outside of their control. And therefore, rather than receiving this linear rate, they would receive a flat rate, and we can decide what that is. But an example could be 75% of the total amount. And that the reason why it's not 100 is because when we do fix that systemic outage, we do want to provide some incentive to like re-enable the service. So if everyone is down and receiving 100%, there's no reason for everyone to come back online. So we just have to be a little bit thoughtful about that. And then the last part of this proposal is that we would want to also be able to like automatically remove nodes that are performing poorly. And this goes back to a little bit of the philosophy or the mechanism in the previous proposal of the slashing. There's no slashing, but we would use that same kind of calculation of downtime. So we would come up with some period of time, let's say it's 2 days, and the attestation service is just required to perform one successful attestation over those period of 2 days. So it's not really easy to game or to like attack an attestation service, because you can like you're gonna have a positive attestation. So you can affect the denominator, but what we care about is that there's at least one. So it's a minimum set. If this rate, or if this completion amount is not met, then that anyone can automatically remove that attestation service. There's no additional penalty aside just losing out on the potential reward that would be happening during that epoch. At any point in time, the idea would be that attestation service would then, the operator would fix the service and then be able to, at any point in time, put it back into rotation just by associating it again with their validator. And then as a safety precaution, we're going to also set a minimum number of attestation issuers. So this is just to ensure that, like, let's say that there was a large number of folks that were being removed. We don't want this number to drop below a certain threshold, because that affects the integrity of the attestation service. And so Victor put together this nice study, which is linked in the spec, where he analyzed what is the likelihood of an attack given a number of different parameters, such as like the number of attestation services, the number of bad actors, et cetera, et cetera. And so based on that study, it looks like setting it to a minimum of 60 attestation services would be a reasonable threshold. And this is a non-linear scale. This is a logarithmic scale on the y-axis. So you can see that it degrades pretty quickly as the number of attestation services drops. So in the interest of time, I'll wrap up there and open it up to questions.
Is there anyone who has feedback or questions? Not sure if there are any of the validators attending the call.
I have a.
Victor raised his hand first. Go for it.
I've been giving a lot of feedback in the issue, so why don't you go first, Celo?
Cool. Yeah, no, I guess I'm curious if you've thought about how this would actually be implemented. So I think, based off my recollection for the attestations contract, there's like not really a concept. There's nothing you can look at quickly to figure out like what percentage of attestations a certain validator completed over a given time frame.
Yeah, exactly. So this proposal also recommends modifying the attestations contract to include state to track this, and that's specified in the spec.
Sweet, I will take a look.
Victor?
Yeah. When talking about the threshold we set for what like a full completion rate looks like, what 100% rewards looks like, I am nervous about our ability to set a static threshold for that, largely because like the number of like right now we see 70% completion right now as like being a kind of a pretty common threshold at the, like where good validators are above that, and validators that don't have good performance are below that. However, that does that mean that the validators who are above that mark are doing the best they possibly could, that they are responding to 100% of the requests and that it's the client's fault? Or does it just mean that like there's still room to improve? I don't know the answer to that. And this all is very subject to the client dynamics across different epochs, including clients who are dishonest and are, you know, sending out spurious requests. I don't think that's necessarily a big portion of it right now. It could be in the future per se, but I am slightly less worried about that. But I guess the larger point being that, like, I think we have, I don't think we have the ability to, I don't think we have the insight we need to set a static threshold that's going to maintain its robustness over time. The other, and related to that, in the global like circuit breaker mode, when it goes below us the circuit breaker threshold and it goes into the mode where everyone gets a fixed reward, I think it removes the individual incentive, even if there's still a group incentive. It removes the individual incentive to actually put your service back online. And so I did have an alternate proposal about, like, you know, creating a dynamic threshold instead. And I'm just curious if that's like, if you had any initial feedback for that. Yeah, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so addressing the latter question first, the dynamic threshold I think is a good idea. And that is actually included in the final draft of this proposal. The only catch there, the thing that I was noodling on, was that I was worried that it would create this kind of like death spiral where because if it's calculated based off of a historic baseline, once the current low success rate starts being included into that baseline measure, then that will further drop this dynamic threshold even lower. And so I think over a long time horizon, like let's say 30 days, it's probably not an issue, but I would be worried in the span of, like, let's say it's over 2 or 3 days as an extreme, then, you know, that number can quickly drop and be unobtainable. Maybe that's a feature, but I was worried that it would incentivize attestation services to like continue to chase it down, because then, you know, it's like, you know, you end up with that fixed rate of 75% rather than the variable rate, which you may or may not be hitting. And then regarding the 70% target threshold, or I guess the like static versus dynamic target threshold, my thought was that we could set it to be governable and base it off of like our historic success rate. And especially now we have, like looking at this chart, we have like a good baseline of like where everyone is at without any issues. But yeah, I definitely am open to ideas of like how we can set it dynamically. Ideally, it would be dynamic, but I just don't feel confident in coming up with any kind of algorithm until we have like given this enough time. And I feel like doing it through governance would give us a little bit more control and like awareness of, you know, how this fits in with the larger context of the LoRa and the SMS providers.
Okay, I need to cut in because we're 3 minutes over time and stuff. So my question is the proposal as it is, as a draft, is it currently ready for you to like, do you want it to go through the review stage, or are you just collecting more feedback at this point, and you want to come up with a final version later?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on how much, it seems like based off of the discussions, things have pretty much settled, but there might be 1 or 2 things outstanding. So I would love to like give this as an opportunity for people to add more feedback. And if it does look good, then I would like it to go to the final review stage.
Okay, cool. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll try to schedule another call for 2 weeks from now. That should give enough time to finalize everything. And anyone who has any more questions and stuff, Deepak, sorry, we're over time, just add it to the GitHub issue. We'll have another all-core dev call in 2 weeks. I'll alert all the validators and everyone to attend the call. And we can see how we can move this from draft stage, a more final draft stage, to the last call. And with that, I want to thank everyone. Thank you all for attending this call. And let me turn off this video. And yeah, catch you guys again next time. We'll have a call in 2 weeks and stuff. So take care, everyone.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. See you.